Treasurer, welcome to 7:30.
Thanks very much, Sarah.
Is this your pre-election budget?
Oh, we're working towards a budget in March. That's the schedule that we've been working to, and really what Katie Gallagher and I have been doing is working on this mid-year budget update and the March budget more or less simultaneously. It'll be here before we know it. But today's mid-year budget update is a really responsible set of books. It reflects the progress that we've made. It gets the deficit down for this year a little bit, and even where there's slippage in some of the subsequent years because of more spending on Medicare or medicines or pensions, we've still engineered this $200 billion positive turnaround in the budget since we were elected, and that means less debt for Australians to repay.
Let me just stay with this question of the budget. I want to put it this way. Are you saying that if there is no budget before the election, there's enough information contained in this document for the voters to judge you and your economic management?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to preempt decisions that the Prime Minister takes about the timing of the election. Our expectation is that we're going full term. The election will be in the first half of next year. We're working towards delivering our fourth budget towards the end of March. That's what Katie and I have been working towards. But what this is the fullest, most recent accounting of the pressures and priorities of the government, but particularly, I think, that really quite substantial progress that we've made cleaning up the budget. That $200 billion turnaround means $177 billion less debt and $70 billion less interest on that debt. And that means that we've been able to make room for these pressures and priorities which are in the budget.
Now, you said today, if we can afford to do more, and there is a case to do more to help people with cost of living, of course, then we will consider that. How will you know whether or not you can afford to do more? What further data do you need?
Well, what we do in every budget, Sarah, and what we'll do in the next budget, like in the first three, is we'll weigh up the economic conditions and we'll weigh up the budget pressures and the budget constraints, and we'll make the best decision that we can and help people as much as we can, consistent with our responsible approach to managing the budget. That's how we got to the cost of living relief that's rolling out right now.
You have a relatively modest amount, $5.5 billion set aside under the heading Decisions Taken Not Announced. That would suggest that only a moderate amount of additional relief is possible. Is that correct?
Oh, I'd caution you against drawing those kinds of conclusions. As you know, the Decisions Taken But Not Announced line item in the budget is a permanent feature under governments of both persuasions. As you rightly point out in your question, this year it's a bit smaller than what it has been in other years, particularly in other pre-election budgets. And often it's made up of things like decisions which have been taken but which require some kind of negotiation with the states or with others, or decisions that have been taken where there's an element of commercial in confidence. It's not all election commitments, it's not all necessarily cost of living, it's a range of things. And what we've tried to be there when it comes to that particular line item in the budget is very responsible, as you rightly point out.
We'll return to that when the election comes, but today's figures show a large increase in government spending this financial year. Doesn't that fly in the face of claims that the government is working with the Reserve Bank in the inflation fight?
Oh, no, I don't believe so. I mean, what the Reserve Bank Governor has said publicly before is that public demand is not the main game when it comes to inflation and interest rates. And if anything, the fact that we handed down 2 surpluses in our first 2 years was helpful to the fight against inflation. And today we've also shown that we've got that deficit for this year even smaller, and it's now almost half what we inherited when we came to office. And so we're running as tight a ship as we can. We're obviously conscious of and focused on the fight against inflation, and in that regard, we work closely with the Governor of the Reserve Bank.
But the Governor of the Reserve Bank has never said that government spending has no impact on the job that she is trying to do. Did you have discussions with the Governor about these figures in MYEFO, in particular the very large increases in public spending while you've been Treasurer?
I have. In fact, I asked the Treasury Secretary to run the whole Reserve Bank board through the mid-year budget update at the beginning of last week, and he was able to do that. And then I personally briefed the Reserve Bank Governor earlier this week. That's not unusual in my time as Treasurer. You know, I've gone out of my way to make sure when we've got budgets and budget updates that I personally briefed the Reserve Bank Governor, so she knows what's coming, she knows what we're grappling with, and knows what the various bottom lines and different aggregates are. And so I took the opportunity earlier this week to do that. And that's because I acknowledge that we've got the same interests and objectives here to get on top of inflation without ignoring the risks to growth. That requires us to work together where we can, and briefing her on these numbers and where they've landed is an important part of that effort.
So I wonder what she said about the level of federal spending. I'm not asking you to answer that because you'll say you won't disclose it, but the question goes to you. Federal spending as a share of the economy will be more than 27.2% next year. How do you justify public spending at a runaway rate like that?
Well, there's a couple of important points to make there. I mean, first of all, a lot of the spending which is in today's mid-year budget update is things like the indexation of the pension, strengthening Medicare, more kids in early childhood education. And so a lot of the differences in spending are parameter variations. They are automatic, or they are genuinely unavoidable. Things like funding for natural disasters, funding to support veterans because we're getting more claims processed. These are a big part of the story when it comes to the spending. When it comes to spending as a proportion of the economy, we're actually, in the year that we're in now, it's lower than what it was anticipated to be in the pre-election fiscal outlook. And so we've made a bit of progress there. But I'd make this broader point, Sarah, so that we don't get into a kind of back and forth about very specific numbers. You know, people have asked me in the course of today, you know, should we have and could we have cut harder in the budget? And the answer to that is we could have, but we shouldn't have. And that's because the economy is quite soft and people are under very substantial pressure. Now, we've made a huge effort and we've made substantial progress turning the budget around. It is hundreds of billions of dollars stronger than what we inherited. But we have to strike a series of fine balances here, which recognise that inflation's the primary target of our economic policy, but we can't ignore the risks to growth. We can't ignore the fact that people are under pressure. And now would be the worst time to slash and burn when it comes to things like Medicare or pensions and payments, all of these sorts of things which are so important, but especially when people are doing it tough and the economy's soft.
But the way that you present this, it's as if it's a choice between what you have presented here and a slash and burn or austerity government, which you say the opposition wants to bring in. But spending growth is forecast to rise from 2.9% last year to 5.7%. You say stay away from the figures, but those figures tell a very clear story about the decisions of your government. So again, I come back to the question, how do you justify an increase of $58.3 billion?
Well, partly it goes back to the unavoidable and automatic changes in spending. That's part of the story. It's also partly about the fact that we were able to restrain spending so substantially last year. You're making a comparison between one year and another year. But if we want to talk about numbers, think about it this way, Sarah. The net policy decisions in this budget, the net spending in this budget update I handed down today with Katie Gallagher, was $17.5 billion. In the last coalition budget, it was about $39 billion. In the mid-year budget update before that, it was about $45 billion. And they had no savings in their last budget, and we found almost $15 billion of savings in this budget. So we have shown restraint, we have found savings, we have banked in our time in office upward revisions to revenue, and that's why we had those two surpluses in the first 2 years. It's why we've got the smaller deficit in this year, and that's how we've got the budget in much better condition at the same time as we've rolled out cost of living help and invested in the future, not instead of rolling out cost of living help and investing in the future.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Merry Christmas.
Now, the Shadow Treasurer, Angus Taylor, joins me from Parliament House. Angus Taylor, welcome back to 7:30.
Good to be with you, Sarah.
Now, the Treasurer there said he didn't want to do back and forth about specific numbers, but I think we should do some specifics. If we go to the government's budget position that they presented today, among the expenditure adding to the budget, there's money to support wider access to childcare, for example. Tell me about that, $5 billion over 5 years. Would you cut any of those funds?
Well, can I start by saying, Sarah, that what you actually see in this statement is a huge increase in government spending since they came into government, $347 billion. That's about $34,000 or over $34,000 for every Australian family since they've come to government. And the result of that is we can see deficits as far as the eye can see. And of course, not only has the Treasurer driven the economy off a cliff, he's driving the budget off a cliff. Now, we've been clear that there are areas where we see real potential for savings. In fact, we've opposed, through this term of Parliament, over $110 billion of spending initiatives. And we'll continue to oppose spending initiatives that we think aren't appropriate. We're working through new initiatives that the government announces as quickly as we possibly can, but $110 billion is a significant number. And the reason for that is it's not cutting back on essential services, it's not cutting back on the things that Australians need to get by, but it is saying there's unnecessary spending that this government is committed to,
all right,
that is only going to make inflation worse, and is only going to make it harder for the Reserve Bank to get its job done.
Yes, all right. So are new childcare centres, $1 billion worth of new childcare centres, necessary or unnecessary? Well,
we've already said we'll work through those childcare initiatives that were only announced a short while ago. Although we have said that we don't think it is appropriate to add extra spending to childcare for people who are not conducting activities, so not involved in work and not involved in looking for a job and so on.
All right, so we take from that there will be cuts to childcare. So what about health? Let's have a look at health.
Well, no, can I just say there, Sarah, we've been very clear that right now, for people who are working hard and need to find a place to put their kids while they work, we understand the need for childcare. But reducing the activity test, or getting rid of the activity test, in fact, is not something at a time like this that we think the country can afford. And I think that's an important point. That's a very different question from building childcare centres. We need more on the supply side of the economy. There's no question about that.
Understood. So you're not in support of the activity test. A question about health then. Let's ask a question about health. So amongst the extra money committed to health, which is part of this budget, there's money for more access to advanced cancer treatments and more nurse practitioners. There's obviously more money to keep medicines on the PBS. Which of any of these items would you cut or not support? Well,
we've been clear. We're not interested in cutting essential services in health. We've been clear about that. But we have been clear that adding $5 billion a year in expense in Canberra-based bureaucracy is not appropriate at a time like this. Adding 36,000 Canberra-based public servants, that's not the right number at a time like this.
So there'll be
Building 28,000 kilometres of power lines.
If we could just stay with health for the moment, so there'll be no curtailing of money that's been committed to cancer treatments or nurse practitioners, for example.
Well, we've been clear about health, and I've said that earlier today, and I'll continue to say that. So, look, the Labor Party will spin their way and say there's all these things we want to cut. We want to cut the spending that is not appropriate at a time like this, because what those spending items do, what those dollars spent do, is add to inflation, add to interest rates, make it harder for the Reserve Bank to get its job done. And indeed, the extra government spending in the economy right now, we know, is crowding out the private sector. We need a business-led recovery from a slump that Labor has overseen, 7 consecutive quarters of GDP per capita going backwards, the biggest slump in household disposable incomes in our history, Sarah. We've never seen this before, far worse than any of our peer countries. But the way to fix this is not to throw more money at it, it's to get the economy moving, particularly the private sector and small businesses overall.
There's $1 billion in this budget for reform of the NDIS. Is that a figure that your government, the government you'll be part of, are you to win government? Would you support that?
Well, again, we've only seen these numbers today, and I have seen them for less time than the media. The media get a lot more lead time on seeing these numbers.
I think about half an hour, but yes.
Well, but look, we've been clear that we'll work with the government to contain the growth in NDIS spending and sensible initiatives that are going to do that. I mean, the objective here is not austerity, it's to contain the growth in spending at a level so that your economy is growing faster than your spending. That's a fiscal rule that used to be in place. Labor's got rid of it And as you rightly pointed out, we're seeing spending now growing far faster than the economy, and that means government is growing. It ultimately then means either inflation will be higher for longer, or people will pay more in taxes, or indeed both. And that's not what we want to see.
All right, I want to ask you about nuclear power, because you're sticking with the claim that nuclear power will bring down electricity prices by 44%. That's going to happen around 2040, is that right?
Well, we're saying that Australians' spending on their electricity bills all the way through to 2050 will be 44% lower in our plan versus Labor's.
So when will
it's
that
pretty straightforward.
What
and
year?
That is on...
This is a very precise question, Angus Taylor. What year precisely are you predicting you'll deliver savings on energy bill relief to households? What year will that be?
Well, over all of the years through to 2050.
What year will that start?
Well,
Sorry, to be clear, I think the audience is entitled to hear this answer. They've heard you say that you're sticking with that claim that it's going to bring down prices by 44%, despite that not being part of Frontier's modelling. So the question is, what year
Sarah,
will...
can I respond? You've got to give me a chance to respond to the claims you've made, which are just wrong.
OK, one question at a time. What year will those cuts to household power bills from nuclear energy begin?
Well, I'll answer that question, but I'm going to correct a claim you have just made. Frontier Economics was very clear. They pointed out that under our plan versus Labor's, there would be a 44% reduction in the bills being paid by Australian households and businesses. That was very clear in their report. And that is the claim we have made, and it's an important one. Now, that is an aggregate of spending over all of the years through to 2050. In terms of the shorter term, we'll have more to say in the coming weeks and months. But the one point I will make tonight that I think is crucial is that to get bills down in the shorter term, you've got to get more supply into the system. And key to that will be making sure we've got more gas coming into the system, and we don't see the withdrawal of the coal-fired power stations prematurely, and we continue to see the growth in renewables, which we've seen over many, many years, including the time when I was Energy Minister. If we get that balance right, we can get a reduction in the shorter term as well. So
that's your plan to bring down the cost of electricity prices if you win government next year. But do you accept that if you cut renewable programs, you'll have to increase reliance on those coal-fired power stations? You accept that formula?
Well, it's always about getting the balance right. And we think Labor has not got the balance right. And the Frontier modelling tells us they haven't, because we know we can get down to net zero emissions by 2050. And we can do that in a way which reduces electricity bills for Australians by 44% compared to Labor's plan. That's very clear in the Frontier modelling, and that's the foundation of our plan.
Angus Taylor, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Good to be with you, Sarah.
Thank you.